Our next speaker is Richenda Connell, who is the co-founder of Acclimatise UK, and she's going to talk to us about the business case for adaptation at the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico. Manzanillo, actually, in Mexico. Richenda is co-founder of Acclimatise, an advisory firm specializing in climate change adaptation and resilience. Her professional career has focused exclusively on climate resilience since the late 1990s, and she leads Acclimatise's services to the infrastructure and built environment sectors, supporting public and private sector clients on major investments. And Richenda holds a doctorate in atmospheric chemistry from the University of Oxford. Richenda, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and great to be part of this adaptation focus day here at PIANC. So I'm going to give quite a brief run through of a study that we did for the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico. Inigo's corrected my pronunciation on that. And what I really want to emphasize is that when we did this study, we were really trying to demonstrate the business case for adaptation. I'm also going to conclude with a couple of points around the wider, broader business case for adaptation beyond the sort of purely financial and economic type of analysis that sometimes gets done. But I really want to focus on this aspect of, can we really make business sense around adaptation in the ports arena? So just very briefly to introduce the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico, it's on the Pacific coast. It's one of the 10th largest ports in the Americas, very important in terms of containerized cargo. Almost half of Mexico's containerized cargo goes out through the port. And it also handles other products such as bulk minerals and general cargo and agricultural bulk products as well. And it is vitally important for Mexico's trade, trading goods from more than half of Mexico's states, and with trading relationships with more than 14 or so countries worldwide. So, a very important port for Mexico's economy. So, we were involved in a study that was funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, as part of a wider technical cooperation that they had put in place with the Port Authority, who are called Manzanillo. And this technical cooperation was linked to an investment in a new container terminal being developed at the port. And the technical cooperation had a package of projects which were aimed at promoting sustainability practices, and our study was part of that. I led the study from Acclimatise. We also were supporting a lot of the analysis by Worley Parsons at Vision, who provided the engineering expertise into this project. What we were trying to do is to say, how could climate change affect the financial performance of the port, and in fact also other aspects of performance, but really with a focus on the financial performance? And could we make the case to the port that they needed to take action in order to address climate risks, and that we could make a business case around that? We also wanted to eventually end up with the actions that we might identify becoming part of the business practice within the port. So we had a big emphasis on workshops, as Robin was mentioning earlier on really consulting with the stakeholders at the port, the Manzanillo, the Port Authority, but also with the private terminals, 14 private terminals there, and really asking them in as many ways as we could, how does the weather affect what you do? And by starting with that understanding about how the weather currently affects them, where their critical climate-related thresholds are in terms of aspects of port performance, we could use that information combined with information about future climate in order to provide a very grounded and practical assessment for them about how ignoring climate change, what it could mean to them, and could we make a case for them to adapt. Some of the terms shown on this slide have been used, I know, in the final set of speaking presentations yesterday. We had this emphasis on risk-based decision-making around adaptation, so making this part of a risk management approach at the port. Excuse me, we looked at the whole of the port's value chain, so navigation and berthing, goods handling and storage, vehicle movements inside the port, so all of the operations within the port itself, but also how could climate change affect the onward inland transportation routes that we use by companies moving goods in and out of the port. And we also took a very bold step to try to say, how did we think that changes in climate and the impacts they would have on the economies of the port's leading trading partners, what those could mean for the port's financial performance. So this issue of climate change impacts on trade, which Regina has just been referring to, and what that might mean in terms of demand for the port services. And there were a couple of other aspects as well, but with time being what it is, I won't go into all of the details. I can certainly provide a link to the full report for anyone that's interested. Ultimately, what we wanted is mainstreaming of adaptation measures where we could justify them into the port's plans. And so I'll come on to talk about that a little later on in terms of sort of how we got on with that process of mainstreaming of adaptation. Given the time I've got, I'm just going to sort of cut to the high-level messages in terms of the most significant financial risks that we identified for the port from that big suite of topics that I mentioned just now. And these were the three aspects that we identified: increased surface water flood risk affecting the port's entrance and access road, increased sedimentation of the port basin due to runoff, not sedimentation due to any coastal process, but due to runoff associated with this surface water flooding, and then the impacts of climate change on the global economy and what that might mean for the port, noting that those aspects were more uncertain. So those were the largest financial risks that we identified, but what we found was that none of the risks that we identified for the port would be sort of showstoppers in any way. So you'll see that when I come to present the results. So that's great news for the port. Nevertheless, we did identify some financial risks that they felt it was important to take action on. So I'm just really going to focus on this top bullet point here around, or the top two, around surface water flooding and sedimentation. So the port is a focal point for rainfall draining in from the surrounding area. There's the city of Manzanillo sits to the north and around the port, and so rainfall from this region drains through the port and actually already causes some problems with flooding. So they do have flooding events occurring at the port which affect the entrance and exit road, and they affect the customs area. What we did to begin to evaluate these risks, in terms of the climate science, we put quite an emphasis on looking at observed trends in climate parameters over the last whatever period we could get data for. But here we have data starting from the 1980s, which looked at the trends in heavy rainfall events, and we found a statistically significant upward trend in terms of heavy rainfall events. So we have a sign that this issue of surface water flooding is already on the up. We also then drew on the climate change projections from the IPCC. I won't go into all of the details there, but we used both the global climate model data, some regional scenarios that have been developed, and for some of the climate parameters where there was more uncertainty, like changes in tropical storms, we used sensitivity tests to explore the impacts of those. And what we found, we did some modelling of how climate change could affect peak discharges, and we found that there would be about an estimated doubling in the frequency of the drain surcharging by the 2050s. So a doubling in in the risk of surface water flooding. So then we assessed what could be the impacts of those floods in terms of the finances. I'm just going to very quickly take you through the dimensions that we looked at. So first of all, we looked at the impacts of surface water flooding in terms of maintenance costs for the Port Authority, Acclimatise. And at the moment, dealing with maintenance and repair following flood events is the second most significant component of their annual maintenance budget. So it's an important factor to them. To give you some sort of bearings on the financials here, they're about 20 Mexican pesos to the US dollar. So 6 million Mexican is sort of 300,000 US. So as I said, we're not talking about enormous numbers here, but nevertheless important. And we were able to assess how this maintenance cost could increase in future if nothing was done to tackle this increasing surface water flood risk. And we found an extra 3 million Mexican pesos per year for this maintenance to deal with repairing roads following flooding. Secondly, surface water flooding disrupts the operations of the private terminals operating at the port. And it was one of the issues that came up most when we consulted with the terminals was the fact that sort of 1 to 2 days a year they're not able to operate because of the flooding affecting the customs area and the access road. And so again, we evaluated how much it could cost them in the future if nothing was done to resolve this surface water flooding issue. And I won't go into all of the analysis here given the time, but we tried to explore both this doubling in the frequency of surface water flood risk that we got from the climate change projections, and then we also did some sensitivity testing around changes in tropical cyclones, which, as some of you will know, is one of the most uncertain elements of the climate change science. The third component then that we costed up was how much this extra surface water flooding might cost in terms of sedimentation and the maintenance of the drains to remove the sediment and other debris that washes into the drains, and also the maintenance dredging that they have to do at the port when this runoff goes into the port basin. And so again, we were able to come up with a set of financial estimates there in order to begin to build this case around how much it would cost if you ignored climate change. Now, drawing all of that together, we were able to do some financial analysis around looking at upgrading the drainage system. And so I have a graph here that shows Appiman's cash flow into the future under 3 different scenarios. So the blue line is what we term ignoring the effects of climate change. So this was Manzanillo's projections of what their cash flow would be in the future, because they hadn't thought about climate change before the study. The engineers then at Worley Parsons Advision came up with some very high-level estimates around increasing the capacity of the drain and also installing sediment traps on all of the drains. And they did these high-level estimates and looked at the impact of implementing those adaptation measures and what that would do to cash flows. And that is shown by the green line. And you can see that the green line shows that Appy's cash flow drops for the period of time when they are spending the money on the adaptation measures. Now, what you also have on this graph here is the red line, which is if they fail to adapt. And what you can see from this is that failure to adapt over the longer term will lead to lower cash flows for them than if they take action on adaptation. So they take this hit in cash flows for a couple of years when they're implementing the adaptation measures, but after that then it is more cost effective to implement the adaptation measures than to take the hit of climate change. Very quickly, because I've had my 2-minute warning, we also wanted in this study to explore the issue of the timing for the implementation of the adaptation measures. So should they delay? Was there benefits in them taking a phased approach to the adaptation And so we looked at different scenarios for that, because that's always one of the questions you have to ask. Should we adapt now, or should we wait and delay taking action on adaptation? And when we analysed the effects of those different implementation scenarios, what we found is that using the discount rate that Manzanillo used, which is 10%, that the investments in adaptation were financially worthwhile. They had positive net present value, shown by the small red bars here. If they delayed implementing the adaptation measures, then net cash flow would be lowered, because it left the port exposed to climate risks for longer. But it improved the internal rate of return because of the effects of the discount rate, which favours delaying taking action. So these were the sort of dimensions that we were trying to reveal to Manzanillo. Now, in my last minute, I just want to talk about what Manzanillo has done following this study. They have a port master planning process, and in their most recent master plan, they have incorporated the findings of the study. They use a process of a risk matrix as a tool to inform their master planning process, and they've incorporated the findings of our study within that risk matrix. So that's a great result for us to see that this is really being mainstreamed. So through this process, they had in mind that they would implement these upgrades to the drainage system that we had found in the study. But then, I think it was Robin who said, events, dear boy. They were overtaken by events in a positive way, if you like, because in fact within the city itself, a decision was taken to change the drainage system within the city. So runoff that had just been flooding the streets within the city was enclosed within a drainage pipe which ran through the port. And so suddenly Manzanillo found themselves with a large pipe draining a lot of water and debris from the city coming into their drainage system. So they realized that they needed to act more quickly, and in fact now they have implemented the drainage upgrade in light of that. I just want to end with a sort of a reflection from the team at Manzanillo that they say that they are now planning with a different vision and have in mind the findings of this study as they plan for the future. So that for us is a great result. So thank you very much.